Hello, 11th and 12th grade, and this is your continuation of United States History, Heritage of Freedom. We're starting today in chapter 21, and we'll be covering work from 21 to 23 in this section. Okay. We're going to start with number 1, Oliver H. Kelly, who was an employee of the Department of Agriculture. He founded a national association of farmers called the Grange. The Grange was set up specifically to create almost like a labor union for farmers where they could have collective bargaining and they could approach the government for issues that needed to be addressed by law. The Populist Party, also known as the People's Party, was formed around this time as well by several politically active regional groups called Farmers' Alliances, and those in turn merged with several labor groups. So the Populist Party was going to become very, very important because of their philosophy towards government. It's going to be very different than what the Republicans or the Democrats believe. And they are really going to fast track and push the U.S. government into much more involvement with the American people in the name of helping out specifically farmers. Okay. The Populist Party platform was perhaps the first widespread political expression of the sentiment that no matter what the problem is, the government ought to do something about it. Farmers for a very long time had been very proud of the fact that they could take care of themselves no matter what. But the Populist Party really pushed the idea of you've tried to take care of yourself and you've done a bang-up job thus far, but you are being a victim of those who are taking advantage of you. So therefore, the government needs to step in and help you because you're the little person who needs the help. If this sounds at all familiar, it's because we studied some of this before watching Wizard of Oz, which in turn was a bit of a political metaphor for the politics of the day that it was written. So according to this little one sheet here, join the Populist Party. It's farmers fighting for freedom, looking at themselves as being the little people that need to be helped. They said they wanted more government help and support for farms, increased coining of silver to increase inflation because that was being taught as a good thing to increase inflation, which meant there was more money on the market. The thought process behind that being that the more money that's in the farmer's hands, the more bills they can pay off, not taking into account that there's another side to inflation, that when inflation increases, the price of everything around it increases. So the farmers who are trying to pay off bills then have to pay out more money for food and seed and other things that they need on the farm because now the price is up everywhere for everything. They also wanted more government ownership of all railroads and shorter work days for all America's workers. That shorter work days is going to be part of, it's really one of the issues with labor unions wanting that shorter work day. For the government owner of railroads, the farmers believed that if the government had control of the railroads, that the prices would go down. And so together they said, we can take America back to prosperity. Ulysses S. Grant was the Civil War hero that finally got the North in the right direction for the Civil War. He was nominated by the Republican Party and elected president in 1868. This is after Johnson. Johnson's not going to be elected. He was president because Lincoln died, but he's not going to be elected into the office. Ulysses S. Grant was always known as being a very upright and honest person, but he was surrounded by unscrupulous men who were politically savvy. Ulysses S. Grant was not necessarily politically savvy. He was very intelligent in the ways of war. That was really the only thing he was excellent at. But when it came to politics, he depended too much on other people to help him and wasn't always clear about whether or not they had his best interest or the nation's best interest in mind. Jay Gould, during the time of Grant's presidency, he attempted to corner the gold market, meaning he's playing the stock market. He used money from the Bank of America, not Bank of America, the Bank of the United States, to basically buy up as much gold as he could and then make huge profits by forcing the price up. The end was a stock market crash on Friday, September 24th, 1869. That day became known as Black Friday. It wasn't a good Black Friday. Today, when we talk about Black Friday, it's a good thing. Back in Jay Gould's day, the idea of Black Friday meant that it was a depressing day. Today, when we talk about Black Friday, it's a really good day for retailers. Black Friday is the day after Thanksgiving, and it's the first day of the shopping season for Christmas. The whole purpose of Black Friday is to get the stores into the black. In other words, that they're making a profit. Back in the day, when stores and merchants and whatever, when they would keep their books, they would have all their profits written in black and all of their debts written in red. So the idea of having a Black Friday meant that you were making a profit during that day. So that's a good thing. So even though I personally don't enjoy shopping on Black Friday because I don't like crowds, I am not against it. I think it's great that our retailers are making money on that day because it comes down to all of us. It helps all of us in our economy. Okay, Rutherford B. Hayes was elected president in 1876. He was the next Republican candidate, but he was awarded the majority of electoral votes by the Electoral Commission. He didn't earn those outright through the voting process. It was a little different. There was another man who was being voted at the same time. They were really close to a tie. That man was a Democrat, and he was from the South. The South basically said, what we'll do is we will throw the electoral votes your way, Mr. Hayes, if you promise to do certain things for us. So it was a quid pro quo issue where he was told, we will let you be president. We will give you our electoral votes from our states if you remove federal troops from the South. And by this time, it's 1876. So the Civil War has been over for a very long time now. Remove federal troops from the South completely and let us run things the way we see fit. Make sure you have a Southerner on your cabinet so that we have at least one person speaking for us to you, representing us to you in your very own cabinet. And that's what we want from you. We want you to remove all these federal troops. And that his election as president ended Reconstruction. Okay, Chester A. Arthur became the president after the assassination of President Garfield. I don't know why we just skip over President Garfield because he's pretty stinking amazing. President Garfield was an amazing guy. He really was. He was a Bible-believing Christian, strong believer in Scripture, was elected president on the very important idea that he was going to get rid of the spoils system. The spoils system had been around since Andrew Jackson, when he basically said, if you help me get me elected, I will give you a job in Washington. And it ended up with a lot of people getting jobs that they weren't qualified for, but they were getting a really hefty paycheck to do them. Garfield said, we don't want to do that. What we need is standardized testing to find out who is best qualified for what job and get really good professional people in there to do jobs, not just attached to the president. Now, because he was running on this very unusual platform, the Republican Party said, okay, you're going to have a lot of people who are on your side, but you're going to have some people who aren't really happy about getting rid of the spoils system. So you need to have someone to run as vice president who has really an opposite point of view than you, which is the very common method when they are setting up a president and vice president. They usually have very opposing views. So his vice president was Chester A. Arthur, who did like the spoils system. He wasn't a real fan of getting rid of the spoils system until President Garfield was killed. President Garfield was killed by a lunatic who believed that he had helped Garfield get elected. He published a paper, a booklet, stating why Garfield should be president. He passed it out among people at caucuses and electoral meetings. He stood on the street corner and read it out loud to people as they passed by. And he really believed that when Garfield got elected, it was because of him, because of what he had done. His name was Gautier. And after Garfield was elected and ensconced in the White House, Gautier came to Washington. He basically sold everything he had. He didn't have a whole lot. Put on a nice suit, took all the money he had, went to Washington, D.C. to meet with the president. Went to the White House to make an appointment and said, I helped the president get elected. Here's a copy of the speech that I wrote, and I, gave it on street corners and at several, events. I helped him get elected. So therefore, I want him to give me a job. Now, this is exactly what Garfield had been campaigning against. He was campaigning against the spoil system, and yet Gautier was asking for a job for getting Garfield elected. And the secretary who took it down said, okay, well, what job are you looking for? And he says, I want to be ambassador to France. Well, who doesn't? And the guy just kind of laughed at him and said, no, that's not going to happen. He says, well, I have the right to meet with the president. Back in this day, believe it or not, they had chairs out in the hallway outside of the president's office, and people would come in and they would sit in the chair and he would talk to them one by one. So Gautier came, he sat down, he sat there for the first day. They didn't get to him. He left. He didn't have any money for a hotel, so he slept in the street, came back the next day, waited, and he would get a little more stinky, ripe. And by, sitting there day after day, laying in the street and then coming in, people started getting concerned about who this man was. He was obviously not in his right mind. And finally, the man who would normally let him in finally told him, look, this is not going to happen. You will never be the ambassador to France. The president is already really busy. He doesn't really have time to talk to you. You need to just go home, find something else to do with your life. And Gautier was very upset by this, and he decided that he was going to become famous by removing a president that nobody liked, because he didn't like him. He assumed nobody liked him. So he went to a local pawn shop in Washington, D.C., and he was looking through the glass cases, and he found a gun that had a pearl handle on it, and he said, that's really pretty. That would look great in a museum. That was his thought process, because he was planning to kill the president, and then after he was arrested, he would be praised by the newspapers. The people of the United States would thank him, and they would put his gun that he used to rescue them from this president in a museum for people to look at. So he found out that the president was getting ready to leave for New Jersey. His wife had gone in ahead. Washington, D.C. in the summer is very sweaty and sultry. It's kind of a mess. So people would go away to the ocean in the summertime to just relax and get some cool breezes. So his wife had gone into New Jersey, the president and his son, and one of the president's advisors, who was Abraham Lincoln's son, Robert, were with him. They were in the train station, and Gautier walked up behind Garfield and just shot him point blank in the back. He was tackled almost immediately. The president did not die right away. He was taken off to a house where the surgeons tried to locate the bullet. They weren't able to find it. They tried multiple times. They used a long probe to push through the bullet track to try to find out where the bullet was. And they went all through the president's body looking for this bullet. And the poor president would just get infected, and they would pump pints of pus out of his bullet hole. He lost a lot of weight very quickly, had really high fever. At the time, Alexander Graham Bell came up with this idea of, well, maybe we can use a bullet finder. So he created this magnetic, a way to try to find the bullet using magnetism. And every time he tested it on other people, on metal, it would work. You know, somebody'd have something metal in their pocket and he would run the wand over them and he'd be able to find the metal. But every time he put it on the president, the whole machine would just go haywire. And he couldn't figure out what in the world was causing the problem until much, much later, after he was told, we don't want you to do this anymore, because the president was already going through so much discomfort with these doctors probing and pawing at him. And it wasn't until much later that they discovered that the reason the machine went haywire was because the president was laying on a metal bed. The president ended up dying of his wounds about 2 months later. And Chester A. Arthur became the new president. Now, after the assassination of President Garfield and the arrest of Gutiérrez, Gutiérrez could not believe that he was being tried for the assassination of the president. He expected a parade and thank you. He expected Chester A. Arthur to thank him. And Arthur said, this guy is a lunatic. And he, in turn, changed his whole idea over the idea of the spoils system. And he said, you know what? We need to pass the Civil Service Reform Act, also known as the Pendleton Act, in the name of the president, Garfield, because this is exactly what he had warned us would happen, that we would end up with people who are not able to really do the job, getting the job. And so we just need to make it so that we have testing done so we get the right people in the right job. As for Gutiérrez, he was executed after a long trial. But his gun is still in the museum, though. You can go see it. Okay. The Pendleton Act classified certain federal jobs. It means it designated them as jobs to be awarded on the basis of merit. In other words, the idea that you could take a test and it be said, yes, this person is able to do the job. If it wasn't even a test, if you just had long years of experience doing a similar job, then you could do that. Sorry, I'm gurgling. Okay, Grover Cleveland became the first Democrat to win the presidency after the Civil War. He was especially admired for standing up to the Democratic Tammany Hall, which was a political machine in New York City. And he's going to be the first of many things in history. Pretty much, if you say who was the first, it's very likely Cleveland. He's always a good bet to go with Cleveland. So the first Democrat to win presidency after the Civil War. He was also the first man married in the White House. I think that was him now that I said it. Yeah, first man married in the White House. And the first president ever to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. He served 1 term of 4 years, then lost his re-election bid, and then came back after another 4 years. Okay, Thomas Reed, also known as Czar Reed, he was a Speaker of the House during the Harrison administration, and he was known for his aggressive leadership. Many of Reed's rules are still followed by the House of Representatives today, and this was specifically to keep the senators and the House honest, specifically the House. Okay, the McKinley Tariff. This was a brand new protective tariff that gave a higher degree of protection to American industry than any tariff passed up to that time. It included a reciprocity clause addressed to foreign nations. So this idea of a protective tariff to protect really the people who were manufacturing at home. Oh my goodness. I am so sorry. My stomach is gurgling like crazy and I cannot stop it. I can't do anything about it, but I apologize if you can hear that. It's really loud. Okay. Grover Cleveland won the presidency again in 1892. He was the only president to serve 2 terms, not in direct succession to one another. And the story is that Mrs. Cleveland, when she left the White House after the first term, shook hands with the current first lady and said, "Take good care of the place. We'll be back in 4 years." And sure enough, they were. Okay, so Grover Cleveland won the presidency in 1892. William Jennings Bryan. He became the Democratic nominee in the election of 1896, although he was only 36 years old, and you had to be at least 35 to become president. He was already considered one of the greatest orators of all time, and you know him as the Cowardly Lion in Wizard of Oz, because when we read that together, that was part of how the Cowardly Lion was based on William Jennings Bryan's speeches. And also, he also is considered the wizard. Okay, so when you look at the character, it was like the two sides of William Jennings Bryan. At the Democratic National Convention, Bryan made a famous speech called the Cross of Gold speech. He demonstrated his understanding of the importance of agriculture to America's prosperity, but he did not demonstrate his understanding of basic economics. So his whole thing was, do not sacrifice the farmers on a cross of gold, stating that the cities want a gold standard, the farmers need inflation so they can pay their bills. But inflation just inflates everything across the board. It doesn't just inflate what the farmers are gaining, it also inflates what they have to pay out. So he was pushing for no gold standard, and he wanted more free silver as well, a free silver standard. In the late 19th century, America's first controversy with Britain involved the CCS Alabama and other British-built ships that had been used by the Confederacy to deal heavy blows to Union commerce during the Civil War. Turns out that a lot of the Confederate ships were actually built in Great Britain, because Great Britain had been on the side of the Confederacy at the very beginning, and then they switched sides and they started supporting the North instead. Once Queen Victoria realized that, she saw this as the South actually revolting against their elected official, their president, then she backed away from that. Okay. So this became the really big controversy with Britain, based on, you built ships basically for our enemy. Okay, the U.S. had a dispute also with Chile in 1891. The Chilean government was upset because the United States refused to sell it arms. The USS Baltimore was docked in Valparaiso, Chile, and its sailors were attacked by Chilean citizens. 2 sailors were killed, 18 were injured. The United States at that point said, you can't do that. You cannot attack our military when we are there on maneuvers, or we have permission to be in your port. You cannot attack our military personnel. And because you've done this, we can go to war against you. You have threatened our military. We can go to war. At that point, Chile apologized and paid damages. And that's how it ended. It really ended right there. It was all about, oh, our bad. We blew it. We're sorry. We'll pay damages for that. William Seward was Secretary of State under Lincoln and Johnson. He drew up a treaty with Russia, providing for the purchase of Alaska for $7,200,000. He was not praised for this idea. His thought was, hey, we're going to get a huge piece of property added to the United States. That's awesome. And we're getting it for a real steal. I mean, we're talking a couple cents per acre. But a lot of Americans were really upset with this. They said it was a waste of money. We could use that $7 million for something else. And they called him names, and they called his purchase names. They looked at it as a very bad investment. So many Americans were not convinced that the purchase was a good investment. They referred to Alaska as Seward's Folly and as Seward's Icebox. They also saw it as him kind of taking advantage of President Johnson. This is a Thomas Nast cartoon. Thomas Nast was really our first political cartoonist. Political cartoons basically try to tell you a whole story in one frame. They're not necessarily funny. It's just kind of the way it is. But according to this, it says Nast ridicules the purchase of Alaska from Russia by depicting Secretary of State William H. Seward as an elderly mother caring for her child, a small version of President Andrew Johnson dressed as Uncle Sam. On the wall poster in the cartoon's background, Uncle Sam is shown trudging in snowshoes across the icy tundra, planting American flags on Alaskan mountaintops as polar bears and walruses watch. That's right behind Seward's head. A picture of an Eskimo family is sarcastically labeled one of the advantages. And that's just a horribly racist little bit of Thomas Nast coming through, looking at the people of Alaska and saying, oh yeah, like they're not going to be an advantage to us. Yeah, anytime we have American citizens, they're an advantage because we can work together. We can make something great out of our country. So this is just a shame. It's a shameful thing that Thomas Nast said. It turns out Alaska was rich with natural resources such as fish, specifically things like cod and salmon. Also rich in fur, timber, that's trees, gold, oil, and natural gas. And it is a beautiful place. And if you doubt that, just talk to Mariah and Lacey Salcido because they go up there almost every year on a cruise and they love it. It's really beautiful up there. Pago Pago. This was a coaling station set up by the United States for steam-powered ocean vessels. This is basically around the place where every steamship needed to reload with things like coal and water and fresh food. So the United States set up a base right there in Pago Pago. And they ended up purchasing this land as well for a territory for the United States. It is part of American Samoa. Tutuila is the island on which Pago Pago is located, and it became one of the first U.S. possessions outside of North American continent. You can see it right there on the bottom of your screen. Oh, no, you can't because I'm in the way. Sorry about that. Holy moly. Wow, I just forget the map. It's right behind my head. That's where you can see it. America Samoa, it's right behind my head. Today, Tutuila and the neighboring islands controlled by the United States are collectively known as American Samoa. You all know a Samoan person in the United States. Right now, it is Mrs. Larson is part Samoan. So her family is right from this area. Okay, Captain James Cook was the first European to discover the Hawaiian Islands in 1778. For decades, English and American sailors stopped in Hawaii for food and supplies on their way to and from China. Originally, they were labeled the Sandwich Islands because the Earl of Sandwich helped to finance the trip for James Cook. James Cook was actually there for the purposes of exploration by the Royal Society of England, which was a scientific society. But the Earl of Sandwich is the one who actually helped to pay for a majority of that travel. So the islands were given the European name, the Sandwich Islands, after that Earl. The Hawaiians still call them the Hawaiian Islands because that's what they were called. I'm actually going to stop right here because our time is just about up. I will talk to you guys again on Monday. Don't forget to work on homework a little bit at a time so that you're not overwhelmed at all. I don't want you to be overwhelmed. I want you to take a little bit at a time and get your work done. Don't forget that you have words to read. That's the name of a book, not just random words, going around reading random words. I know some of you would do that. So please read Words. You only have 2 chapters to read before Tuesday, and so you need to get that done. If you absolutely cannot purchase the book for yourself, they will be available in the school office, so you can make arrangements to go pick them up. I will talk to you Monday. Have a really good weekend. Bye.